How did Cyril Astruc and his organization steal €6 billion from the European Union? Where does the nickname Prince of CO2 come from? What connects him to the Israeli mafia? How does he live in immense luxury, despite being one of the most wanted people in the world? What does this case have to do with the Polish art affair from the early 1990s? These questions are addressed in today's material. Cyril Astruc was born in 1973 near Paris. His parents were Jewish immigrants who moved to France from Algeria in the early 1960s. Cyril's mother was a teacher, while his father ran a small tailoring shop. The future Prince of CO2 also had two older sisters. Although he was considered a decent student, Cyril was more drawn to criminals operating in nearby neighborhoods than to academics. To protect him from a criminal path, his parents sent him to a private high school in a wealthier area. There, he got a glimpse of the affluent world he dreamed of joining. To earn some money, he started selling marijuana. He continued his education, eventually earning a bachelor's degree and starting work in the insurance industry. Astruc quickly climbed the career ladder and by the age of 22 owned his own company in Paris. However, by the late 1990s he began associating with shady businessmen and former drug dealers. These relationships led to his first legal troubles. In 2001, he was arrested and charged with insurance fraud. He spent 6 months behind bars and lost his insurance company. He was later sentenced to 3 years in prison, which he appealed. In the meantime, he continued committing financial crimes, mainly VAT carousel frauds, repeatedly trading the same goods, shipped from France abroad. I didn't feel like I was robbing craftsmen or small business owners. That would have been immoral. We were only robbing the state. Over time, he expanded his operations to London and Dubai. Fearing that his trial might result in a conviction and facing threats from criminal competitors, in 2003 he decided to flee to Israel with his family, changing his name to Alex K.H. There, he befriended Amir Molnar, a boss of the Israeli mafia. Astruc invested in Molnar's organization, while Molnar provided protection from rivals pressuring Cyril over his European ventures. When Molnar was eventually arrested, the police also began looking into Astruc. Forced to flee again, he moved to Los Angeles in 2005. There, his family lived in a lavish mansion, and the Frenchman continued running his businesses remotely. That same year, he was arrested by American police over an extortion case in Switzerland. After some time, he was extradited to Europe. Astruc also invested in many legal businesses in Switzerland. He opened a bar, a nightclub, several luxury boutiques, and a stable with 30 racehorses. He was also seen at parties with Russian oligarchs. But 2008 became a turning point in his life and the organization later known as the CO2 Mafia. The clock was ticking and the sunset of his empire was on the horizon. It all began back in 1997 in Kyoto, Japan. At that time, many economically developed countries signed an agreement to combat global warming. The main goal was to reduce CO2 emissions. As a result, emission limits were imposed on businesses. In 2003, the European Union implemented a directive introducing a carbon emission trading system. If a company emitted less than its limit, it could sell the remaining emission allowances to another company that exceeded its limit and needed more to operate legally. A year later, France launched an official market for trading these allowances. White-collar criminals quickly moved in, and the most important of them was Cyril Astruc. The CO2 Mafia created fake companies in tax havens that bought VAT-free CO2 allowances en masse. These were then resold to EU countries at prices including VAT. The profits were funneled through hundreds of shell companies in Panama, Cyprus, Dubai, Luxembourg, and Latvia, and then those companies were shut down. Operating this way, the CO2 Mafia made hundreds of thousands of euros daily. After about 18 months, authorities realized what was happening. France alone had lost over €1.5 billion. The total loss across the EU is estimated at around €6 billion, possibly even $10 billion. This massive fraud led to stricter regulations and oversight in the carbon trading market. As authorities searched for the perpetrators of what was dubbed the fraud of the century in France, police began knocking on the doors of company heads that traded in CO2 allowances and then suddenly shut down. It turned out that these companies were registered to fishermen, garbage collectors, retirees, small shop owners, or gardeners. Straw men who agreed to register companies under their names for a small fee. The investigation revealed a complex web of deceit and manipulation. At the time when French and Belgian authorities, Belgium also lost millions in the scheme, were hunting Astruc, He was living like a king in Jerusalem under his new identity, Alex KH. He resided in a €15 million villa, drove luxury cars, and hosted parties with Israel's biggest celebrities. He even appeared on Israeli television. However, local police began scrutinizing him closely. The turning point came in 2012 when Astruc crashed a Ferrari in Tel Aviv and attacked other drivers at the scene. He was arrested and charged with assault and illegal possession of a weapon. Soon, the full extent of his wealth and influence was revealed. Once his real name was uncovered, he was quickly linked to the CO2 Mafia. Israeli authorities released him but summoned him to Paris to testify in the fraud of the century case. Astruc was seemingly unaware that multiple arrest warrants had been issued for him in Europe. He boarded a flight to Paris where he was immediately arrested. He was convinced he'd be released quickly, but to his shock he spent the next 15 months in custody. Parisian investigating judge Guillaume Daillet, who questioned him, said, "Guillaume Daillet, it was the first time I dealt with someone like this. At one point he had 13 lawyers, he loved to put on a show and tried to charm. And when someone tries to charm, they talk a lot. For an investigator, that's a good thing." Astruc firmly denied having any connection to the CO2 case, claiming that everything authorities knew about him was one big lie. The court released him after 15 months on a €4 million bail, under the condition he stay in France, wear an ankle monitor, and report to the police station daily. Upon release, the fraudster gave a flashy TV interview, wearing crocodile shoes and a shiny blazer. It was just one of many provocations aimed at the authorities. When he vanished again, he posted a photo on Twitter in a t-shirt reading, "Catch me if you can." This brazen act left authorities scrambling to locate him once more. Astruc's and his associates' trial began in 2017. He showed up at the first hearing but then disappeared. Interpol took over the case, issuing a red notice for one of the most wanted criminals in the world. After fleeing, he emailed Customs Officer Emmanuel Dussault, Cyril Astruc. "Hello, Inspector. Given my situation, I'll understand if you don't respond. I had to leave. I really wanted to defend myself, but the trial became so dangerous I lost control. I was getting threats. I could pay, but not for a fake narrative. That's not how I define justice." Authorities believe that the CO2 prince, as dubbed by French media, was indeed receiving threats and feared the escalating violence among carbon credit traders. Several suspicious suicides and murders occurred, including a shooting where 2 people on a scooter fired an automatic weapon at a CO2 trader and vanished. It's believed Astruc exposed many powerful individuals, and even private security couldn't keep him safe anymore. Investigators say he fled to Monaco, then took a yacht to Tel Aviv, where he was again protected by his old friend Amir Mulner, the Israeli mafia boss. The chase continues, but for now the Prince of CO2 remains elusive. In 2019, Cyril Astruc was sentenced by a French court to 10 years in prison, a €2 million fine, and asset forfeiture. However, like many others convicted in the fraud of the century, he legally resides in Israel, holding Israeli citizenship. Israel has long been reluctant to extradite its citizens. Until recently, it didn't extradite Israeli passport holders at all. As investigators say, this situation is often an outrageous exploitation of the myth of returning to Israel as a homeland, serving instead as a pretext for evading justice abroad. Many people convicted in the CO2 Mafia case live legally in Israel in incredible wealth and luxury. Israeli authorities are aware of their sentences and whereabouts but do nothing, as no crimes were committed on Israeli soil. When asked by journalists, Israeli officials insist they are not a safe haven for criminals, and that they do extradite, but could not explain why no one from the CO2 Mafia has been handed over to France. In the summer of 2021, French TV journalists working on the series Planet Killers met Astruc in Israel. He claimed that although he wasn't in prison, he felt trapped because he couldn't leave the small country. Outside Israel, he would be arrested immediately. Interpol and French services remain determined to bring Cyril Astruc and other CO2 Mafia members to justice. After the scandal broke, France and several other European countries introduced changes to their tax systems to prevent similar frauds. This fraud of the century can be loosely compared to a famous Polish scandal from the early 1990s, the Art B affair. At that time, 2 young businessmen, Andrzej Gasiorowski and Boguslaw Bagsik, exploited a loophole in the banking system. Using a so-called economic oscillator, they repeatedly earned interest on the same deposit. When they were accused of fraud amounting to 4 trillion old zlotys, roughly 420 million in today's money, they fled to Israel just before being arrested. One of them soon obtained Israeli citizenship, while the other already had it. Gasiorowski didn't return to Poland until 23 years later, in 2014, when his arrest warrant was cancelled, and the court dropped the pretrial detention order. The RTB affair remains one of the most notorious financial scandals in Polish history, much like the CO2 fraud in France.